Hello everybody and welcome back to A Weekend Made for Spike. Let's hop right into Monday morning. It was strange at first, this pleasant fling of rushing water that seemed to somehow catch him unaware, along with an oddly enticing smell that has seemed to mist out from everywhere. Lust to the relaxing sensations of the rising rush of wetness over his body, his mind began to fight goggly against the fog at its edges that resisted him. When he was reaching out for reason or memory of where he was, the flow pushed and ebbed him against him, swirling first as it continued its stimulating massage while pulling him into its depths. There was no fear though, no sense of foreboding or rising sense of dread. As he was slowly immersed into this whirlpool he found himself caught in. It was relaxing, pleasing, and altogether pleasurable in spite of the danger that he was supposedly in. But then, there's no danger, is there? His thoughts whispered to him, because it's all just a dream. With realization came clarity, and he fully let himself go, enjoying the sensations all around him. It would not last long. Like water through his fingers, reason slowly came back and the fantasy slipped away. As his head finally submerged completely beneath the ripple of water, reality tugged and pulled him back to its clutches. His eyes opened wearily to greet the new day, but something still felt awry. It was fuzzy at first, a mass of white, a streak of purple, and some black around the edges of all seemed to be fitting his vision. A pleasurable moan escaped him as he realized that something wet and moist with a broad and rough object inside was working on him lower down. His mind was still foggy, but Spike understood what was happening. He grabbed a hold of the white hills before him, laying his fingers across the teal diamonds, causing a to resonate from his waker's currently stuffed mouth. Moving his head up, he rewarded Rarity with a good morning kiss right on the lips. "Master!" He smiled deeriously at the unicorn who was sucking him off moments ago. "What? If that's how you want to do the whole good morning kiss." He did it again, making it as sloppy as possible as she shivered from the treatment. "I wouldn't be much of a gentle Drake if I didn't kiss you back, right?" Rarity tried hard not to moan. After all, it was probably best not to encourage such. Somehow Spike had managed to sit far enough up to slip his hand under the top of her ensemble and was now playing with her breasts. It had taken her a few moments to even find a position comfortable enough to wake her dragon up this way. On her knees was awkward because he had rolled over and claimed the middle of the bed when she went to change. At any other position she tried refused to give her the angle or stability she needed. Just when she was about to give up, it hit her. She could lay on top of him as long as she kept a leg on each side of him. For Spike, however, it had only taken a matter of seconds to realize how to take advantage of her precision. Honestly, she should have known displaying herself in front of his face like that. Attempting to return to servicing him proved futile, as Spike got his arms around her waist and flipped her unceremoniously onto her back, leaving her lying on top of him. "Eep!" She squeaked out at the sudden movement before finding herself being pleasantly cuddled against the dragon, the warmth of his heritage flooding over her. She couldn't help but follow his example and press into him. "Are you not gonna let me finish, master?" His hot breath blew into her ear as he whispered, "Nah, we can finish in the bathroom. Right now I just want to stay like this, having you close." He nuzzled against her further. "Although feel free to wake me like that whenever you want." He had a point. There was just something comfortable about how their bodies radiated against one another, his strong arms pulling her against him as she melted from his touch. In some ways it was better than the sex. Now, not nearly as passionate and fun though. Still, on a cold night, this was all she would ever need. The Drake she loved and his tender hold as they laid there quietly enjoying each other. Responsibilities of the day ahead began to plague her thoughts. "If we don't stop, we'll fall asleep again." She felt a little crestfallen at the idea of leaving his arms, but time wasn't theirs to spare this morning. She still wanted to make use of what they had left. So vanilla filled his senses and he took a whiff of his love's hair. "Well, Twilight is coming to pick you up today, and I'm sure we can find a more interesting way to spend our time before then." Now there was a prospect that piqued his interest. He quickly slid out from under Rarity, leaving the surprised mare crashing on the soft sheets below. Before being scooped up in the dragon's arms and carried into the bathroom like a princess, once inside, Spike placed her back down before quickly undoing the strings, keeping her maid uniform on and tossing it in the sink, enjoying every inch of her as it was revealed to him. Rarity was quickly assessing the situation she had just been carried into. "You really enjoy doing it in here, don't you, master?" Incredibly so. He gave her a playful little nip on the flank as her skirt hit the floor. If this was going to be anything like yesterday, she should see why. Returning the favor, she went about undressing him, taking a moment to fawn and trace her fingers over his muscular body. When we go to the beach next month, you're gonna turn mares into frantic, crazy animals with these. Blushing a little more than he wanted, Spike smiled dumbly. Only if they work as well on them as they do on you. It was always nice to be teased. Speaking of, Rarity slid her hand down along his scales to where Spike would reveal himself, petting it gently with her velvety fur. Her little payback worked wonders as she felt her favorite mare breakers come back out of hiding. Without any warning, Spike forced Rarity's hands back to his chest. Not yet. Turning to the side, he turned to the bathtub and letting it. With a flourish, he dragged Rarity with him into the shower, turning the water on with his tail before kissing her passionately. After a few moments of allowing the water to soak in, he placed a bar of soap in her hands, squeezing just a bit. Let's see if you've improved any since last time. Rarity found herself being led out of the enclosed shower as the water turned off, so Spike thought he was going to question her technique. Huh? Well, if that was how it was going to be, she knew exactly how to make that Drake of hers purr. She lathered her hands before moving the bar of soap to her considerable bust and rubbing it all over. The feeling of the soap on her breasts and quickly hardening nipples was magical. It left them feeling slippery and slick. And more than once she had to suppress a moan as she worked it intricately into her fur. Spike seemed almost hypnotized by her lewd display. His eyes never strayed from her bust, and she loved it. Once she felt that she had perfectly worked in the soap, she placed a finger on his chest and showed it over as she moved behind him. Admiring his gloriously broad back, with her hands placed firmly on his shoulders, she pressed her chest forward against his back, moaning lightly as her nipples and breasts were pushed against his tough scales, long spines, and the rubs of the wings. They were all so smooth. When he felt those voluptuous mounds against his back, he subconsciously stood a little straighter. Each grind and rotation felt like two giant marshmallows pressing warmly against his back with a pointing little chocolate chip in each. Rarity had certainly thought up a winner with this one, but Spike was not ready to be outdone just yet. He snuck arm down between his legs and brought his fingers to the source of his lover's heat. He dipped in and joined the ecstatic yelp from his unprepared mare. Spike had easily stalled her in a most pleasant way, but it was not that simple to deter Rarity. In an instant, she was once again working away at the Drake's backside as he worked his fingers inside of her. The lower she slid down his back, the further he had to stretch to stay in her. And to both the regret, he eventually had to pull out completely. Of course, Rarity's disappointment was short-lived once she realized where she was. Spike's nice, firm ass. She was going to enjoy this. The extra gusto with which Rarity started moving against him was not lost on Spike. You really like my ass, huh? Just because it would be rude for a lady to stare doesn't mean we don't take the occasional glance. She pressed herself even harder against him, wrapping her arms around his waist. And this is one site I'll be taking a lot of glances at, far more than I already have. It was a little strange for Spike not to be doing anything. In a way, it was kind of nice to just relax and get treated, but he really preferred taking part. Bingo! It was a shame Rarity could not see the devilish smirk on his face. His tail sneaked its way along the floor and moved up, searching for its target. Drops of water dripped onto it, but once something more viscous than water hit it, he knew he had found it, as a spade on his tail began rubbing up and down the wet folds. Rarity's delighted gasp filled his ears. He could not help but thank Celestia Dragon's tail was so dexterous. Perseverance, the one word that seemed truly exemplify Spike's nature to her. When one thing did not work, he just tried another instead of giving up. In a way, it was how he had managed to catch her affection, and even now that he had it, he still worked as hard as he could to please her. Earlier this weekend, she had made a point that it was her job to take care of him and his needs, but she had come to realize that real love was about working together for each other. Spike was making sure to give just as good as he got. His tail may have been alien to her marehood, but Spike was managing the same techniques he used with his fingers. Ugh! The spade came down hard on her flank, undoubtedly leaving a nice red mark. Rarity had to keep herself from panting. The stimulation from her rubbing and Spike's was proving quite challenging to that endeavor. She would not give up though, placing Spike's first leg between her breasts and moving down slowly before switching to the other. With only one part of the side left, she placed a kiss at the base of his tail and began soaping it up with the same way she did the legs. The flexible spine sliding perfectly between her busts. Once again, Rarity had gotten too far down for his reach, but she was just about done. As she finished, she placed a kiss on the tip of the spade she had yet to shampoo. Tasting herself on it, it seemed so wrong to enjoy one's own taste, and it added just a bit more heat to the inferno raging inside her. As Rarity turned to his front, he could not help but to enjoy the intrinsic beauty she held without her makeup. A gem beneath a jewel, her fur appeared a little ruffled where she had met his back. It was cute, of course. She was not done yet as she applied more soap and brought herself to his chest. The sweet and somehow mischievous smile was intoxicating, and before he knew it, she had slung her arms around his neck and pulled him into a hot, tongue-tangling kiss as she used her entire body as a loofah. He could not taste her saliva in his mouth as they wound around each other. Feel her chest against his, and the warmth from her marehood pulsing against his lower of the two. Her face was flushed when they finally separated, and he knew his was the same. There was no question that she had managed to get the soap over the rest of the dragon with her hug, but Rarity had no interest in giving up a chance to take more intricate look at the dragon's chest nabs. As she scaled down, she inspected each and every inch of the drake for proper cleaning. She almost swooned when she reached his abs. Training with Rainbow Dash and working at the farm with Applejack was paying off in a very favorable way. Her eye for detail revealed that Spike was entirely covered in soap and ready to rinse off, which meant it was his turn to take care of her, something she was quite looking forward to. As Rarity stood naked before him, numerous thoughts filled his young mind, most of them dirty, a few sweet, and some of that were both. The particular plan he had set his heart on was likely going to go one of two ways: hotter than the fire burning in his chest, or a complete and utter disaster with a slap mark across his face. If there was one thing he had learned this weekend, though, it was that sometimes you had to take a risk to reap the rewards. Rarity, I need you to get on your knees. She did as instructed, curiosity evident. So far so good. Now I'm going to use my special shampoo, so make sure you won't let a drop hit the floor. Spike brought his hand to his already stiff arousal. If it was not clear now what he was planning then, he doubted it would be. He nearly jumped out of his skin when Rarity's velvety hands moved his out of the way. Allow me to get it from the tap myself, master. Rarity was working both of her hands on a different member, being careful to keep her arms out of the shot path. This was so much better than what Spike did it himself, and far more stimulating, being able to watch her breast bounce with each movement. She was quite creative in Spike's opinion, occasionally flourishing her hand up the shaft, only touching it with her perfectly manicured fingernails. Other times she would firmly grasp and go back and forth. The best though was when she would play with the tip, her soft fingers were magically against the extra sensitive spot. Without trying to hold back, Spike was building up quickly and powerfully. His head flew back as a torrent of green fire escaped his mouth, and white dragon seeds splashed all over Rarity's bare chest and legs. Some even managed to land on her face and then remain. The moment he looked back down, he instantly felt himself getting hard again from the view. Rarity, completely covered in his own seed, was one of the hottest things he had ever seen, something that seemed to keep one up this weekend. Her first thought was that she was feeling very sticky. Spike's thick scent was all over her. It was incredibly intoxicating. Using two fingers, she cleaned the small amount that she bestowed from Spike and greedily placed them in her mouth, sucking hungrily and savoring the flavor that much more. Spike's eyes practically bulged from his head, and she had to fight back a giggle, risk losing the sultry portrait she had created. What should I do now, master? Spike gradually returned to his senses. Rarity sure knew how to get to him. What else would you do with shampoo? Rub it. Oh crap. Fumbling past Rarity, he practically dived for the faucet that was pouring warm water into a nearly filled hot tub like that. That was the last straw. Rarity burst into a fit of cute giggles. Spike's quickly darkening face only made it worse, though she did feel a little bad for laughing at him. Well, he rubbed the back of his head. For the sake of preserving the mood, I suggest we pretend I'm not a complete idiot. Somehow she managed to collect herself. Don't feel too bad, master. After all, mares love a gentle trick who can make them laugh. She gave him a wink. Perhaps you have the right idea, though, so what was I doing with all this wonderful shampoo again? In long, drawn-out movements, she began to slide her hands along her voluptuous body, purposely framing herself, putting his dripping, sticky mess out on display in a way he simply could not ignore. Ah, yes, his eyes roamed over the arousing contradiction before him. This most refined and elegant figure, normally so adamant about keeping herself clean, now stood there sullied and defiled by him, and she was loving every minute of it. He took a deep breath to steady his nerves. Well, obviously I want you to rub it in and be nice and thorough about it. Spike turned her towards the mirror and got behind her. She watched as he took some of the cream from her body into his hands. Her expression could have melted his heart. At first the sticky white goo made him a bit squeamish. It was his first time really feeling it, and it was a lot different from hers. However, he knew that he would have to get over it if he wanted to do this. Slowly at first, he started rubbing it into her back. It practically matched her coat color. At the same time, she had begun massaging as much as she could into her chest. Little wisps of smoke escaped his mouth, a clear sign of how this was affecting him. As Rarity was spreading the sticky substance throughout her wet coat, she briefly wondered if there were any possible positive effects of dragon sperm in her fur. Or as her hands ran through it, her mane, as incredibly sexy as this was, it would Even better, it also made her hair fuller, shinier to help offset the amount of time she assumed it was going to take to get all of this mess out. Her thoughts began to fade from her looks as she started working on her breast, brushing against her nipples every few seconds. She hummed contentedly as Spike shifted down to her ass and cutie mark, being nice and rough with her posterior. Without question, she enjoyed being a naughty filly. To further validate the point, her fingers ran down her body straight to the source of her arousal, just touching herself with every hand soaked in her lover's seed. Drove her to moan uncontrollably. Now, it felt so good as she saturated herself with a mixture of her excitement and Spike's. The idea of shampooing herself with his cum was gone, replaced by a desire to force the warm draconic seed of her lover deep into her body. She could feel herself approaching an orgasm from seemingly nowhere as her thoughts became dirtier and dirtier, which made Spike's timing and moving away from her cheeks and right to her tail hole all too fantastic. If Spike's hand had not been supporting her, she would have fallen on her rear on the bottom floor as her body became like jelly. Her mind was swimming in ecstasy, and with another series of pleasured moans, she soon found her hand covered further in sexual release. In her adult state, she brought it up to her face and took a big whiff, musky yet sweet. Without even realizing what she was doing, she brought her fingers to her mouth, licking them clean. Completely obsessed with the taste, once she felt she had every last drop, Spike's head craned over her shoulder and captured her lips against his, allowing her to share the flavor as the dragon's tongue played with hers. As they finally broke apart, Spike and Rarity took a long look at the sperm-covered mare in the mirror. That's sexy, and it seems you enjoyed yourself quite a bit too, huh? Rarity's cheeks reddened considerably as she stared at the strangely sultry mare, wondering briefly if that was really her. This was far from ladylike, but it was magnificent. Then you are going to love this. Holding her hand in his, Spike walked to the nearly full tub and got in, the water shifting ever so slightly as he leaned back. He sighed in content as the warm water reached his neck and carrying his worries away. Extending his arm, he helped Rarity in. As her hips landed on his stomach, he couldn't believe how lucky he was that this beautiful, intelligent, and generous mare was in love with him. A regular dream come true. Although looking at her, it was definitely a wet dream come true. Slowly, Rarity slipped down Spike's soapy stomach until she felt his tips prodding against her. Using her magic, she positioned them for a smooth entrance and pushed herself down. She bit her lip. The water had made the penetration far easier, easing some of the pain she usually felt as Spike entered both hands. Rarity laid her body down across Spike's as she went further in, pressing their chests together ever so pleasantly. In the position, she would be the one controlling the action, and she took full advantage of that by moving her arms around Spike's neck and giving him a deep and fiery kiss, while at the same time turning the switch for the water jet that was hidden behind his head. The jets had always been a guilty pleasure of hers. Her naked body getting tickled and massaged by them had been the solution to unwinding on more than a few lonely nights. Now with Spike firmly planted inside of her, it felt ever better, moving up against her spread lips and tail hole. Spike's face was priceless. There was no doubt the streams of water were doing a number on him as well. Once she grew more accustomed to the sensations of the driving streams of pressure, and Spike being deep inside of her, she began moving her hips up and down. Each time her actions caused Spike to slid out of the hot water filled with empty space, but interestingly enough, each time she tilted, she felt more water spill into her and forced up by the drake's virility and pouring into her open body as the rest of the water was pushed back into the tub. As her body grinded against him, she looked into his eyes. There was so much love and care, so much lust that stared back, that she would have swooned right there as her heart sped up from the sudden flow of emotions she felt for the drake. Had it not been for the swoon-preventing position she found herself in. Her face was so red that she had to look away, causing her to notice the soapy bubbles that had filled the bath and the white-hued water. She had gone from being covered in Spike's seed to bathing in it. The realization had an instant effect. Her body squeezed Spike, creating an even firmer grasp. The extra motivation seemed to drive Spike into a frenzy as his claws dug into her ass and started forcing her off and on him much harder than she had. Her moans filled the bathroom as she became more and more excited by the dragon's sudden cease of control. "Master," she gasped, "please break me. Make it so you're the only one who will ever be able to make me come." To say Spike was having a good time was a bit of an understatement. So far, Rarity has surprised him with a Tab's water massage thingy. It was a little weird having something rising up against his butt, especially one spot in particular, but it still felt pretty good once he calmed down from the surprise. Better still was how it pressed against his twin dragons, different parts receiving attention as she shifted on him. Once she started moving, her breasts and nipples ground against his chest in a very sensuous way. Rarity seemed far too occupied to notice that every time she surged on his body that the water crashed over the edge of the tub, getting all over the floor. Her body was art in motion, and as she started running her hands down her cascading beautiful wet mane, he felt himself twitch inside of her. Rarity always couldn't, it just was not a drama this time. The splashing water was carrying his sperm off of her and mixing it with the soap rinsing off of his own body. The thought of that him and Rarity were basically bathing in dragon cum and so to see water was strangely alluring. The water inside her body seemed to move against him along with her own convulsions as if they had synced together. Everything was amazing, then in one glorious moment she seemed to collapse on him and his mind started reeling from the rush. There were simply too many new and exciting elements to this form of lovemaking with the mare he adored, and it was asking too much for him to hold out as long as he usually did. His claws fell upon Rarity's flank as he wrenched control from her, though based on how loud she was, she did not mind this. That was when he heard her beg for one of the sexiest things ever. It woke something primal and instinctual in him. From his core, a mighty roar rang out as he pushed her as far down as she could go. It felt like the most that had ever come out of him as his body ran on the pinprick of adrenaline and ecstasy. Something had awoke within him, something ancient, both foreign and familiar at the same time. Rarity was his, and she had been all weakened, even if he had not realized it at first, but now she asked him for him to conquer her. In response, he claimed her as his own, a truly beautiful gem and worthy treasure in his possession. No, those kinds of thoughts were dangerous. He had been down this road before. Never again. It was true she was his, but he was just as much hers. Both free and captive at the same time were the two hearts to each other. Thinking like that was going to keep him safe away from that feral beast. Rarity's own orgasm had hit her almost the instant she had heard the roar. It was intoxicating, and it drove her wild in ways she had never known. The vibrations from the feral outcry water jets just surged through her, making her fall limp against Spike's chest. It felt like a gallon of Spike's seed poured into her, but maybe it was just how it was mixing within the waters. It was so hard to tell with her mind addled as it was. Her whole body assumed to convulse and writhe in the force of orgasm, mixing even more into the already murky tub. However, as good as it had been for her, she noticed that Spike's face seemed almost afraid. It was her last thought before blacking out from the pleasure. She woke up tucked in her oversized and cushy bed with the smell of pancakes wafting up the stairs and into her room. As she lifted the covers up, she searched around the riggily decorated room for her clothes. The lighting through the purple silk drapes revealed them folded neatly on one of her work desk with an egg-shaped toy next to them. The controller suspiciously missing, it did not take long for her to slip her maid uniform on and place the vibrator inside of her ass, biting her lip as it went in. It was a shame Spike was not here to do it himself. The thought of those delightful claws on her skin made her shiver. Following the scent of the big batter, she walked into the kitchen. Her heart skipped a few beats at the sight before him, humming some rock tune while he flipped pancakes with Spike, but that was not what had taken her breath and turned her cheeks so dark. No, that honor went to the frilly pink apron that Drake was wearing. The only thing he was wearing. The sight was a masterpiece of polished scale, sleek muscles, beautiful wings, and that perfect rear of his swinging ever so slightly with the tempo. As his tail tapped along the floor to the beat, a familiar warmth began between her legs. Spike was quick to notice the other presence in the room. He had been waiting for her, after all. "Hey Rarity, I'm just about done with the last of these. Why don't you grab a seat?" She was shocked at how he acted like it was the most normal thing in the world to be practically naked in her kitchen cooking. Okay, so maybe this weekend it was not the most uncommon thing. Her current clothing choice could attest to that. "You don't know, I'm supposed to be taking care of you, right? Where did you even get your apron from?" "Nonchalant," he answered back. "This? Oh, I had it in my bag. I figured I'd be making a few meals this weekend, but you've been treating me the whole time. Well, except dinner last night. Funny that's the answer to the first question, too. I believe you've earned yourself a little respite for the wonderful service you've provided." But Spike turned his head, staring at her. His eyes said it all. He was not to be questioned. That's an order. Rarity was glad she was not wearing panties, or else she would have just soaked them from how excited she got with Spike taking charge of her like that. The chair did not fare nearly as well as she sat down, the cushion pressed against her becoming saturated. As you command, master. In an instant, Spike was back to happily placing the hotcakes onto a plate, the table already set for two, and grabbing some syrup from the cupboard, placing the considerable stack down. He shook his head as he admired the flushed look on her face. The mayor loved it when he stripped away her control and her clothes. Fantastic. He slid behind her and whispered into her ear, I'll be right back. And like that, he walked out of the room. The pile in front of her was a little intimidating. Pinkie would probably only see it as a snack. One day, she would have to discover the secret of how Pinkie Pie ate so much and never seemed to put on any weight. Her mind shifted back to the situation at hand. For some reason, Spike was trying to turn her on, and doing a magnificent job of it. Images flashed through her head as her imagination ran wild. Ropes, collars, their bodies pressed against the kitchen table as he drizzled syrup over her, making his own breakfast, and so many more, each more daring and exciting than the last. So it went without saying that when Spike returned in the same clothes he had on when he arrived, she was more than a little curious where this was going. Once he started placing pancakes on his plate and was eating them, quelling the feeling of disappointment that arose was difficult. I think we need to have a little talk about all of this, Spike started. Rarity's entire body screamed at her to jump across the table and yell for the Drake to shut up and take her now, but the memory of Spike's face before she had her unplanned nap flashed before her eyes. Still, it was rude to get a lady riled up and not take care of her, and Spike would be hearing a word or two on the matter later. She had a few pancakes for breakfast. A glance at the clock revealed that it was more of a brunch. Alright, darling, what's on your mind? Where do we go after this weekend? What do we do? Rarity put her utensils down and gave Spike one of her infamous glares. I told you, this isn't just some fling. He raised his hand to stop her. I know, and that's not what I meant. The whole reason this weekend has gone so well is because it's been just the two of us. A yellow Pegasus with pink hair touching herself popped into his head. Mostly, however, Twilight's coming to pick me up this afternoon. Most of the town knows we're dating. Apparently a date between two of Equestria's greatest heroes, as well as between the only dragon in most of Equestria and a very talented and famous designer, doesn't go unnoticed. Plus, I'm fairly certain Dash flew around telling everyone after seeing us yesterday. A weak, sheepish smile was offered. Yes, small town news travels fast. In truth, Rarity was quite thrilled to be the talk of the town. Any publicity was good publicity, and this was extremely good publicity. Spike nearly laughed. Oh, I'll say, Pinkie Pie stopped by while you were asleep and asked when we should have the Rarity and Spike are finally dating, and Celestia didn't take them long enough party. She also may have seen me in the whole naked apron ensemble, as you would put it, because it hadn't crossed my mind at the time. Grasping a cup of orange juice conveniently sat before her, Rarity attempted not to choke. Thankfully, she had not been drinking at the time. And, how did that go? I believe her exact words were something like, nice apron, Spike. Mind if I see what's underneath? Just kidding. Maybe Rarity sure knows how to pick them. It was very awkward. He was not, however, going to mention that it was kind of hot having Pinkie hit on him. A few deep breaths were had as Rarity mulled over the information. Do you think she'll tell anyone about it? I had her Pinkie promise, as long as I let her cop a feel of my rear, he thought to himself. The sudden weight was lifted off of Rarity's chest. Well, it sounds like this is not exactly the most unexpected thing to happen in Ponyville. Yeah, but in most places it doesn't rain chocolate milk because of an escaped god of chaos. Yes, well, be that as it may, I think we'll be okay going out about town. In truth, I wasn't too worried about it. I'm more concerned with Twilight. Can't exactly start with, hey Twi, how was your weekend? Celestia and Luna were that good? Huh? Me? Oh, I just kind of slept with one of your best friends in the whole world multiple times, and we're sort of dating now. Rightfully so. I question how that's going to go over. Spike went to bang his head into the table before realizing that Rarity probably would not appreciate a dragon face engraved into it. As much as she hated to admit it, Spike might have had a point. She had been left in charge of him, and this was far from the normal version of watching someone. It still did not make any sense. Why would Twilight insist that Spike stay over somewhere when the young dragon had been staying home alone while they gallivanted across Equestria for years? Honestly, the Drake was of legal mating age by equestrian law, and in another year he would be considered a full-blown adult. You may have a point, but it does beg the question, what kind of relationship do Twilight and you have? Is she your mother, your sister, your guardian? I know she's more than your boss. The worry from before seemed to fade away as Spike broke into laughter and nearly to tears. My mother? I don't have one. I mean, sure, Celestia raised me, but with all the duties of being the sole princess of Equestria, it was more like I was raised by tutors, mentors, and Cadence when she wasn't watching Twilight or completing her own duties. Don't get me wrong, I love my childhood. How many cults or fillies get to practice swordplay, learn a crazy survival techniques, or any number of amazing skills. Sure, it was a bit lonely, but everything in my life has led me here. I wouldn't trade a single moment to risk losing this. As far as being a guardian, when was the last time you saw Twilight cook or clean when it wasn't reshelving day? The thought of Twilight doing any sort of housework did seem a bit amusing, and her chuckle gave away the fact she thought so. Fair point. Twilight is my oldest friend, my first real friend. She's a nightmare of a roommate, always making messes and flipping out, but it's worth cleaning up after her to have her around, you know? I can't explain how Twilight Sparkle and I are because the words just don't exist. One thing does stick out though. She is very defensive, best friend with outrageous amounts of arcane magical energy to burn if she decides she is angry at one of us. I'm considering digging a bunker. All of the signs seem to point in one direction. Very annoying. Spike, I believe that Twilight might have been pushing us together with this whole watch Spike for the weekend thing. I'll admit that it might be prudent to refrain from mentioning it. We've been going at it like I'm in Estrus, but I think she'll understand us. Rarity moved a hand back and forth between the two to emphasize her point. It did make a lot of sense. Okay, I could see that Twilight being my wing pony doesn't seem so crazy, really. That brings us to the sex, though. It's going to be a little weird, me coming over and staying over all the time and acting like it's innocent, especially considering that in 3 days we've been sexually active. 2 of our 5 best friends have found out in rather compromising ways. On top of that, this weekend is one of the few free you ever really have. Usually you have orders to fill, parties to go to, fashion shows to attend. As things look, we're about to go from tons of sex to no sex for a while. I can't be coming over during business hours, so we can do it in the back room. Too often at least, even without the sex. I still love you, but I kinda like the sex. I know you do too, Miss Break Me Spike. Her face flushed. Ah, yes, well sometimes that's how adult relationships are. However, I will be inviting you to those fashion shows and parties with me as my escort from now on. And I always get the nicest hotel rooms, very big, comfy beds that we could spend a lot of our free time in. She gave him a suggestive little wink to make her point perfectly clear. And eventually, Twilight is going to figure out we're making love, darling. When that happens, it'll be much easier to find the time. The relief on Spike's face was evident. Yeah, I guess you're right. Thanks for hearing me out. Rarity reached over the table, the stack of pancakes long gone, and placed her hand on his cheek comfortably. I'd be a pretty bad friend, and an especially bad friend if I didn't. Whenever you have a problem, any problem, I'll listen, Spike. You have my word. She saw it in his eyes. A fear, whatever had worried him in the tub, was still being kept secret, locked away, sealed, and hidden for now, and it appeared that it would stay that way, but she could wait until he was ready to tell her. At least, this had made him feel a bit better for now. Now, come on, Master, I'm sure you'll have more plans for us before Twilight comes to get you. A confident Drake rose from the chair, leading his giggling mare into the shop. You know I do. All remnants of their meal were gone except the dirty plates and silverware left behind in the rush. The end. Alright guys, that was the end of the morning. I know Monday night, Monday afternoon. There's 2 versions, so I'm going to put that in the combination. And I think I'm going to have an ad separating them. And if the ad doesn't show up, there's going to be like a ding sound effect that will just have alternate ending. Anyways guys, thank you all for watching, listening, doing whatever the fuck you guys do. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Good fucking bye.
100,000 stories have filled my head. As I look for the answer in what I've read, secretly waiting for my life to change. And with this transformation,